To my biological son Thomas, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all real property, financial accounts, investments, and personal effects. The lawyer paused, adjusting his glasses, his voice carrying through the conference room with the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered difficult news countless times before. Around the polished mahogany table, my family sat in various states of anticipation. My mother, dressed in elegant black, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. My brother Thomas leaned forward slightly, his expression carefully composed but unable to hide the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. I sat at the far end of the table, where I had always sat at family gatherings. The position of the afterthought, the addition, the one who was present but never quite part of the main event. To my wife Eleanor, I leave my eternal gratitude for 43 years of partnership, and the knowledge that she will be well provided for through the arrangements we have previously discussed. My mother nodded, as if this was exactly what she expected, which, of course, it was. She had been part of those arrangements. She always was. The lawyer turned a page, and something in his demeanor shifted. A subtle tension entered his shoulders, a slight hesitation before he continued reading. And to Silas. I looked up. It was rare for my name to be mentioned in family proceedings, rare for anyone to acknowledge that I existed as more than a footnote to the Montgomery legacy. To Silas, who is not my biological son, I leave the truth. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I heard my mother gasp, heard Thomas make a strangled sound of surprise, but I could not process any of it. The world had narrowed to those 8 words, each one a hammer blow to everything I thought I knew about myself. Who is not my biological son? The lawyer reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope, thick with documents. He slid it across the table toward me, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes holding something that might have been sympathy. Mr. Montgomery Sr. left specific instructions that this envelope be delivered to you at the reading of the will, and only at the reading of the will. He wanted you to learn the truth in the presence of the family, so that there could be no denial or obfuscation of the facts contained within. I stared at the envelope without touching it. My hands were trembling, though I had not noticed when they started. What is he talking about? Thomas demanded, looking between me and our mother. What does he mean, Silas is not his biological son? That is ridiculous. We grew up together. He is my brother. Our mother had gone very pale. She was not looking at Thomas or at me. She was staring at the envelope on the table as if it contained a bomb that was about to detonate. Eleanor, the lawyer said gently, would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to explain the situation yourself? My mother's voice faltered. I do not. Harold said he would never. Mr. Montgomery changed his mind in the final months of his life, the lawyer said. He felt that Silas deserved to know the truth, regardless of the consequences. He asked me to ensure that his wishes were carried out. I finally reached for the envelope. My fingers felt numb as I lifted the flap and withdrew the contents. There were several documents inside. A letter in my father's handwriting, a faded receipt, a birth certificate I had never seen before, and a photograph of a young woman I did not recognize. The letter was on top. I unfolded it and began to read. Dear Silas, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and the secret your mother and I have kept for 41 years is finally coming to light. I am sorry for the way you are learning this. I am sorry for many things, but I could not go to my grave without giving you the truth that you deserve. You are not my biological son. You are not Eleanor's biological son. You were purchased from a black market adoption broker in 1983 for $5,000. I stopped reading. The words blurred in front of my eyes, rearranging themselves into patterns that made no sense. Purchased. Black market. $5,000. I was bought. Like furniture. Like livestock. Like something that could be acquired with the right amount of cash. I forced myself to continue reading. Your mother and I had been trying to have children for years when Thomas was finally conceived. After he was born, Eleanor wanted another child, a sibling for Thomas, someone to complete our family. But she was unable to conceive again, and the legitimate adoption agencies told us the wait would be years, possibly decades. A colleague of mine mentioned that there were other options, faster options, for couples who had the means and the discretion to pursue them. He connected us with a man who arranged private adoptions, matching babies with families willing to pay a premium for expedited service. We paid $5,000 for you. The paperwork was falsified. The birth certificate you have always known was fabricated. Your biological mother was a teenage girl who needed money more than she needed a baby. We never learned her name. I know this is devastating news. I know it changes everything you thought you knew about yourself and your place in this family. I wish I could tell you that we loved you just as much as we loved Thomas, that the circumstances of your arrival did not matter. But I cannot lie to you anymore. The truth is that I always knew you were not really mine, and I could never quite forget it. I tried to treat you fairly, tried to give you the same opportunities one gave Thomas, but I know I failed. I know you felt the difference, even if you did not understand its source. You deserved better than what we gave you. You deserved to know the truth. And now, finally, you do. I am sorry, Silas, for everything. Harold Montgomery. I set the letter down carefully on the table, my movements slow and deliberate, like someone handling something fragile. The room was silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see how I would react, but I could not give them anything. I was hollow, emptied out, a shell where a person used to be. Silas? My mother began, reaching toward me across the table. Silas, please, you have to understand. We did it because we wanted you. We loved you. You bought me, I said, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat and distant. You paid $5,000 for a baby from some kind of illegal broker, and then you lied to me about it for 41 years. We had to, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. The legitimate channels were impossible. We just wanted a complete family. We wanted you. You wanted a baby, I corrected. Any baby. I just happened to be the one that was available. I looked at the other documents in the envelope. The receipt was exactly what my father's letter had described. A simple piece of paper acknowledging the receipt of $5,000 in exchange for services rendered. No names, no details, nothing that could be traced back to whoever had sold me. The birth certificate was the real one, the original, not the falsified version I had carried my entire life. It listed my birth mother as Jennifer Ann Caldwell, age 17, of Richmond, Virginia. The space for the father's name was blank, and the photograph was of her. A young woman, barely more than a girl, with dark hair and gray eyes that I recognized because I saw them every time I looked in a mirror. She was not smiling in the picture. She looked tired and sad and very, very young. Jennifer Ann Caldwell. My mother. My real mother. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not make a scene or demand explanations or do any of the things that a normal person might do upon learning that their entire life had been a lie. I simply gathered up the documents, placed them back in the envelope, and stood up from the table. Silas, please, my mother said again. Please, we need to talk about this. We need to explain. There is nothing to explain, I said. I understand perfectly. You wanted a second child, the legitimate options were inconvenient, so you bought one. And then you spent the next 4 decades treating me like exactly what I was. A purchase. An acquisition. Something you owned rather than someone you loved. I walked toward the door. Thomas stood up, blocking my path, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like guilt. Silas, wait. This does not change anything. You are still my brother. We grew up together. Did we? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time the distance that had always existed between us. Or did you grow up as the real son, the biological heir, the one who mattered, while I grew up as the spare, the backup, the purchased addition to make the family look complete? Thomas did not have an answer for that. He stepped aside, and I walked out of the conference room, out of the law firm, out of the life I had thought was mine. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, 41 years of them. My name is Silas Montgomery. I am 41 years old, and until an hour ago, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was the second son of Harold and Eleanor Montgomery, the younger brother of Thomas, the quiet one who never quite fit in but who was still, fundamentally, part of the family. I was wrong about all of it. I grew up in a wealthy suburb of Washington, D.C., in a house that was too large for 4 people and always felt even larger to me. My father was a successful corporate attorney, a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, a man who moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in it. My mother was the kind of woman who made hosting charity galas look effortless, who always knew the right thing to wear and the right thing to say, who maintained our family's image with the dedication of a general commanding an army. Thomas was their golden child. From the moment I was old enough to be aware of such things, I understood that my brother occupied a different position in the family hierarchy than I did. He was the firstborn, the heir, the one who carried the weight of expectations and the promise of legacy. He excelled at everything he tried: academics, athletics, social interactions. He was the son that my parents showed off at parties, the one they bragged about to their friends, the one who made them proud. I was different, quieter, more introspective, less obviously impressive. I did well enough in school, but not brilliantly. I played sports, but not exceptionally. I had friends, but not the kind of effortless popularity that Thomas enjoyed. I was adequate in all things, excellent in none, and in a family that valued excellence above all else, adequacy was barely tolerated. My father never hit me, never yelled at me, never did anything that could be classified as abuse in any traditional sense. But he also never looked at me the way he looked at Thomas. There was a warmth in his eyes when he watched his older son, a pride and affection that was unmistakable. When he looked at me, there was something else, distance, perhaps, or obligation, the expression of a man fulfilling a duty rather than experiencing a joy. I remember specific moments that crystallized this difference, moments that stayed with me long after the events themselves had faded. When Thomas scored the winning goal in his soccer championship, my father rushed onto the field and lifted him onto his shoulders, tears of pride streaming down his face. When I won the state spelling bee a year later, my father nodded from the audience and said, "Good job," before returning to a conversation with another parent. When Thomas got accepted to Harvard, there was a party. Family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, everyone gathered to celebrate the golden child's latest achievement. When I got accepted to Princeton, there was dinner at a nice restaurant. Just the 4 of us. My mother said she was proud. My father said nothing. These differences accumulated over the years, building into a pattern that I could not ignore but also could not explain. I was not a bad son. I was not a disappointment in any objective sense. I worked hard, achieved success, stayed out of trouble. But nothing I did ever seemed to register with my father the way Thomas's accomplishments did. I asked my mother about it once, when I was about 16. I asked her why Dad seemed to love Thomas more than he loved me. She got very quiet, very still, and then she said something I have never forgotten. "Your father loves you in his own way," she said. "Some people just have a harder time showing it." At the time, I thought she was making excuses for him. Now I understand that she was hiding the truth, covering up the fundamental lie at the heart of our family. My mother was warmer, more attentive, more determined to make me feel included. But even her affection had an edge of effort to it, as if loving me required conscious work in a way that loving Thomas did not. She remembered my birthday, attended my school events, said all the right things. But I always sensed that she was performing motherhood with me rather than simply being a mother. I spent my childhood trying to earn the approval that Thomas received automatically. I studied harder, practiced longer, tried to be the kind of son that my parents would be proud of. But nothing I did ever seemed to close the gap. Thomas would bring home a B+ and receive congratulations. I would bring home an A- and receive suggestions for improvement. "You have potential," my father would say, and somehow it always sounded like a criticism rather than a compliment. "You just need to apply yourself more." I applied myself until there was nothing left to apply. I got into a prestigious university, earned a degree in finance, landed a job at a top investment bank. I built a career that anyone would be proud of, climbing the ranks until I became a senior partner, earning more money than most people see in a lifetime. None of it mattered. None of it changed the fundamental dynamic of my relationship with my family. Thomas was the golden child, and I was the also-ran, the one who existed in his shadow no matter how bright my own accomplishments might shine. I always wondered why. I always sensed that there was something I was missing, some explanation for the differential treatment that everyone in the family seemed to understand except me. Now I knew. I was not their child. I was their purchase, and no amount of achievement could ever change that fundamental fact. After leaving the law firm, I drove for hours without any destination in mind. I found myself on back roads I did not recognize, passing through small towns whose names I did not register, putting miles between myself and the life that had just been demolished. The sun was setting by the time I finally pulled over, parking in the lot of a roadside diner that looked like it had been serving the same menu since the 1950s. I sat in my car and stared at the envelope on the passenger seat, at the documents that had rewritten my entire history. Jennifer and Caldwell. That was my mother's name. My real mother, the teenage girl who had given me up or sold me or whatever had actually happened 41 years ago. I pulled out my phone and typed her name into a search engine, not expecting to find anything, not sure what I would do if I did. The results loaded slowly, and I scrolled through them with trembling fingers. There were several Jennifer Caldwells in the world, but only one that seemed to match the right age and location. She had died 12 years ago, according to an obituary I found in the archives of a Richmond newspaper. Cancer. She had been 46 years old, which meant she would have been 17 when she had me, just as the birth certificate indicated. The obituary did not mention any children. It listed her parents, both deceased by the time of her death, and a brother who lived in Florida. It described her as a bookkeeper who had worked for the same accounting firm for 20 years, a quiet woman who loved gardening and volunteer work at her church. It did not mention that she had given birth to a baby boy in 1983 and sold him to strangers for $5,000. I sat with that information for a long time trying to feel something. Grief, maybe, for the mother I had never known and now would never have the chance to know. Anger, perhaps, at the circumstances that had led to my existence and my subsequent sale. But I felt nothing. Just emptiness, a void where emotion should have been. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my assistant at work, asking about a meeting I had forgotten I was supposed to attend. I typed a brief reply, telling her to reschedule, and then turned the phone off entirely. I could not go back to my normal life. Not yet. Not until I understood what had happened to me and why. I drove to Richmond the next morning. I did not know what I expected to find there, but I needed to see the place where my life had begun, to walk the streets that Jennifer and Caldwell had walked, to make her real in some way that an obituary and a faded photograph could not. Richmond was a city I had visited before for business, but I had never paid attention to it as a place where people actually lived. Now I drove through its neighborhoods with different eyes, wondering which streets she had known, which building she had passed, which corner of the city had been her home when she was 17 and pregnant and desperate enough to sell her child. I found the address listed in the obituary, the house where she had lived when she died. It was a modest place in a middle-class neighborhood, well-maintained but unremarkable, the kind of house that a bookkeeper with a modest salary might be able to afford. I parked across the street and stared at it for a long time. This was the closest I would ever get to my mother. These walls had contained her life, her possessions, her memories. Whatever traces of her remained in the world were here, in this house that now belonged to someone else. I was about to drive away when I noticed the mailbox. The name painted on its side was not Caldwell. It was Harding. I did not know why that mattered, but something made me get out of the car and approach the house. I rang the doorbell, not knowing what I would say if anyone answered. A woman in her 60s opened the door, looking at me with the cautious curiosity of someone greeting an unexpected stranger. "Can I help you?" "I am sorry to bother you," I said. "I am looking for information about someone who used to live here. Jennifer Caldwell. She passed away about 12 years ago." The woman's expression shifted. "Jenny? You knew Jenny?" "Not exactly. I am trying to learn more about her. I think she might have been related to me." The woman studied me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face as if looking for something familiar. Then she smiled, a sad and knowing smile. "You have her eyes," she said. "I thought so the moment I saw you. You must be the baby. My heart stopped. You know about, you know about me? I know Jenny had a baby when she was young. She never talked about it, but her brother mentioned it once, after she died. Said it was the great tragedy of her life, the thing she never got over. The woman stepped back from the doorway. Why do not you come inside? I think we have a lot to talk about. Her name was Margaret Harding. She had bought the house from Jennifer's estate after she died, had been a neighbor and friend during the last years of Jennifer's life. She made tea and sat me down in a living room that still held traces of its previous owner. A painting of flowers that Jennifer had loved, a bookshelf filled with romance novels she used to read, small touches that Margaret had kept because she could not bear to erase them entirely. Jenny talked about you sometimes, Margaret said, handing me a cup of tea. Not often and never by name, but sometimes, especially near the end when the pain medication made her less guarded, she would mention her baby. The one she had to give up. Had to give up, I repeated. So it was not her choice? Margaret sighed. It is complicated. Jenny was 17 from a very strict religious family. When she got pregnant, her parents were horrified. They told her she had two options: give the baby up for adoption and pretend it never happened, or be disowned and thrown out on the street. What about the father? My biological father? Margaret's expression grew more complex. That is where it gets more complicated. Jenny never told anyone who the father was. Her parents assumed it was some boy from school, someone inappropriate, someone who had taken advantage of their daughter. But I always got the sense that there was more to the story, that the father was someone important, someone Jenny was protecting by staying silent. Protecting how? I do not know. Jenny kept a lot of secrets. Whatever happened between her and your father, she took it to her grave. Margaret paused, seeming to weigh something in her mind. But I do know one thing. About a year before Jenny died, a man came to see her. A wealthy man, based on his car and his clothes. He spent hours inside with her, and when he left, Jenny was crying. Not sad crying, but something else. Something that looked almost like peace. Did you ever find out who he was? Jenny told me he was an old friend, someone from her past who had finally found her after years of searching. She said he wanted to make things right. She said he had resources that could help her, but she was not sure she wanted to accept them. My mind was racing. A wealthy man, searching for Jennifer, wanting to make things right. Could it have been my biological father? What happened after that? Did she accept his help? I do not think so. Jenny was proud. She had built her life without help from anyone, and she was not about to start taking handouts at the end. But she did tell me one thing. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping. She said the man had promised to find her son, to make sure he was okay, to give him what she could never provide. She said it was the first time in 40 years that she had felt any hope about what happened to you. I set down my teacup, my hands shaking too badly to hold it steady. A wealthy man had promised to find me. A year before Jennifer died, which would have been about 11 years ago, someone had been searching for me. Had he found me? Had he been watching me all these years without my knowledge? Do you know his name? I asked. The man who visited Jenny? Margaret shook her head. She never told me. But after she died, when I was helping her brother sort through her things, we found something. A letter that had been hidden in her Bible, unopened. It was from him, from the man who visited. But the brother, he did not want anything to do with it. Said it was ancient history that should stay buried. He threw it away before I could see what it said. Dead ends. Everywhere I turned, there were dead ends. My biological mother was dead. Her secrets buried with her. The mysterious man who had visited her might as well be a ghost. The truth about my origins seemed permanently out of reach. And then Margaret said something that changed everything. There was one other thing. When Jenny's brother threw away the letter, I noticed the envelope. It had a return address on it. I only saw it for a moment, but I remember thinking the name sounded familiar, important, like someone you would read about in the newspaper. Do you remember the name? Margaret closed her eyes, concentrating. It started with a C, I think. Cameron? Carmichael? No, that is not right either. She opened her eyes, frustrated. I am sorry. It was so long ago, and I only saw it for a second. But you said it sounded important. Like someone famous. Yes, someone rich, definitely. The kind of name you see on buildings or in articles about charity donations. She paused. Wait, I do remember something else. The man who visited Jenny, when he left, I saw him get into his car. It was a beautiful car, one of those luxury vehicles that cost more than my house. And it had a vanity license plate. Just 3 letters. CEC. CEC. I thanked Margaret profusely, gave her my contact information in case she remembered anything else, and drove back to my hotel in a daze. CEC. Those 3 letters circled in my mind, trying to connect to something, trying to form a pattern that made sense. I spent the night searching the internet for any wealthy man whose initials might be CEC, who had lived in Virginia, who would have been old enough to father a child in 1983. The results were overwhelming. Hundreds of possibilities, most of them dead ends, none of them obviously connected to Jennifer Caldwell or to me. But then, just before dawn, I found something. Charles Edward Carrington. The name hit me like a physical blow. Charles Carrington was a legend in the business world. A self-made billionaire who had built a real estate empire from nothing, who had donated hundreds of millions to charity, who had been on the cover of every major financial magazine at one time or another. He had died 14 months ago, at the age of 73, and according to his obituary, he had never married and had no known children. I stared at the screen, my exhausted brain trying to make connections. Charles Carrington had been 42 in 1983, already wealthy and successful, already building the empire that would make him a household name. If he had fathered a child with a 17-year-old girl from a religious family, it would have been a scandal that could have destroyed everything he had worked for. He would have had every reason to keep it secret, every reason to pay the girl's family to make the problem go away, every reason to pretend the baby had never existed. But if what Margaret said was true, he had eventually come looking for Jennifer. He had wanted to make things right. He had promised to find his son. Had he found me? Had Charles Carrington, billionaire philanthropist, been watching over me for the past decade without my knowledge? There was one way to find out. Charles Carrington had died 14 months ago, which meant his estate was probably still in probate. If he had left any instructions regarding me, they would be in his will. I called my assistant and told her I needed a favor. I needed her to find out who was handling the Carrington estate and get me a meeting as soon as possible. Then I sat back and waited, hoping that the truth about my origins was finally within reach. The law firm handling Charles Carrington's estate was located in a gleaming tower in downtown Manhattan, the kind of building that announced wealth and power with every polished surface. I arrived for my appointment 2 days after leaving Richmond, still running on adrenaline and coffee and the desperate hope that I was not chasing another dead end. The attorney who met me was named Victoria Chun, a partner at the firm and the lead executor of Carrington's estate. She was sharp-eyed and professional, her expression giving nothing away as she shook my hand and led me to a private conference room. "Mr. Montgomery," she said once we were seated, "your assistant mentioned that you believe you may have a connection to Mr. Carrington's estate. Can you elaborate on that?" I told her everything. The will reading, the revelation that I had been purchased as a baby, the birth certificate naming Jennifer Caldwell as my mother, the mysterious wealthy man who had visited Jennifer a year before her death. I showed her the documents, the photograph, the receipt for $5,000. Victoria listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Montgomery," she finally said, "I am going to tell you something that I probably should not tell you. But given the circumstances, I think you deserve to know." She stood up and walked to a safe built into the wall of the conference room. She entered a combination, opened the door, and withdrew a manila envelope that looked remarkably similar to the one I had received at my father's will reading. "Mr. Carrington left very specific instructions regarding this envelope," she said, returning to her seat. "He said that if anyone ever came to us claiming to be his biological child, we were to verify their identity through DNA testing, and if the test was positive, we were to deliver this envelope to them along with certain provisions of his will that were sealed pending the outcome. DNA testing, I repeated. You want to test my DNA? If you are willing. Mr. Carrington anticipated this moment. He left a DNA sample with us precisely for this purpose. If you are who you claim to be, the test will prove it. And if it does, you stand to inherit a substantial portion of his estate. I agreed to the test immediately. Victoria explained that it would take a few days to get the results, that I should return to my normal life in the meantime, that she would contact me as soon as she knew anything. I did not return to my normal life. I could not. Instead, I stayed in New York, wandering the city like a ghost, visiting the buildings and landmarks that bore Charles Carrington's name, trying to understand the man who might be my biological father. The waiting was excruciating. Every hour felt like a day, every day like a week. I could not sleep, could not eat, could not focus on anything except the question that consumed my entire existence. Was Charles Carrington my father? I spent those days learning everything I could about him. I read his biography, watched his interviews, studied the history of his company and his philanthropy. I visited the buildings he had constructed, the hospitals and schools and community centers that bore his name. I tried to piece together a picture of the man from the evidence he had left behind. He had been remarkable by any measure. Born poor in rural Virginia, the son of a factory worker and a seamstress, he had worked his way through college washing dishes and cleaning offices. He started his first construction company with borrowed money and sheer determination, taking on jobs that larger firms considered too small or too risky. But he had an eye for opportunity that others lacked. He saw potential in neighborhoods that everyone else had written off. He bought land when it was cheap and held it until its value multiplied. He built affordable housing when other developers chased luxury, and in doing so, he created a loyal customer base that followed him as his ambitions grew. By the time he was 50, Charles Carrington was a billionaire. By the time he was 60, he was one of the wealthiest men in America. He had never married, never had children, never explained why a man with so much seemed to want so little in terms of personal connection. The media had speculated about this endlessly. Some said he was married to his work. Others suggested he was gay but closeted. A few whispered about a tragic love affair in his youth that had left him unable to commit to anyone else. Now I thought I understood. He had had a child, a son, born from a teenage girl he had probably loved or at least cared for deeply. But the circumstances had been impossible, the timing catastrophic. He had been 41 years old, on the verge of major success, and a scandal involving an underage girl could have destroyed everything. So he had made a choice, a terrible choice, and he had spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. The call came on the fourth day. Victoria's voice was warm with something that sounded almost like happiness. "Mr. Montgomery, I have good news. The DNA test is positive. You are Charles Edward Carrington's biological son." I sat down heavily on my hotel bed, the phone pressed to my ear, the words echoing in my mind. Charles Carrington's son. Biological heir to one of the largest fortunes in America. What happens now? I managed to ask. Now I need you to come to my office. There are documents to sign, provisions to explain, and a letter that Mr. Carrington wrote for you. He wanted you to have it the moment your identity was confirmed. I was at her office within the hour. Victoria walked me through the legal details first. Charles Carrington had left the bulk of his estate to his charitable foundation, but he had set aside a significant portion for any biological children who might come forward after his death. Mr. Carrington was aware that you existed, she explained. He hired investigators to find you approximately 12 years ago, shortly after he learned that Jennifer Caldwell was dying of cancer. He discovered your identity, your location, your career. He watched over you from a distance, making sure you were successful and secure. He knew who I was for 12 years and never contacted me? He felt that doing so would disrupt your life in ways that might be harmful. You had parents, a family, a career. He did not want to destroy all of that simply to satisfy his own desire for connection. Victoria paused. But he did want to provide for you. He set up a trust in your name, funded it generously, and left instructions that it be revealed to you upon confirmation of your identity. How generously? Victoria slid a document across the table. I looked at the figure printed at the bottom and felt the world shift beneath me. $23 million. The trust has been accumulating interest for 12 years, Victoria explained. It was originally funded with $15 million. Mr. Carrington wanted to ensure that you would never want for anything, even if you never learned who he was or where the money came from. I stared at the number, trying to make it real. $23 million. From a father I had never met, who had watched over me for more than a decade without ever revealing himself. There is also the letter, Victoria said, producing another envelope. Mr. Carrington wrote this himself shortly before his death. He asked that it be given to you along with the other materials. I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in handwriting I did not recognize, the script of a man I had never known but who was, biologically at least, my father. I opened it and began to read. Dear Silas, if you are reading this, then I am dead and you have finally learned the truth about who you are. I am sorry it took so long. I am sorry for so many things. I met your mother in the summer of 1982. Jennifer was 17, working as a waitress at a restaurant near my office in Richmond. She was beautiful and smart and full of dreams that her circumstances would not let her pursue. I was 41, already wealthy, already building the empire that would consume the rest of my life. I should have known better than to get involved with her. But I did not. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was not ready to be a father. I was not ready to give up everything I had built for the sake of a teenage girl and an unplanned baby. I did something I will regret for the rest of my life. I offered her money to make the problem go away. Jennifer was offended at first. She wanted to keep you, to raise you herself, to build a life for the two of you even if I would not be part of it. But her parents were devout Christians who saw her pregnancy as an unforgivable sin. They gave her an ultimatum: give up the baby or lose everything. In the end, she agreed to let her parents arrange an adoption. But the legitimate agencies had long waiting lists, and her parents wanted the situation resolved quickly. They found someone who arranged private adoptions, transactions that bypassed the legal system entirely. They sold you to the highest bidder for $5,000. I did not know about this until years later. I thought Jennifer had terminated the pregnancy, as I had callously suggested. I moved on with my life, built my company, made my fortune. I tried not to think about the young woman I had wronged or the child who might have been. Then, about 12 years ago, I received a letter from Jennifer. She was dying of cancer and wanted to clear her conscience before the end. She told me everything. How her parents had sold you to strangers, how she had spent 40 years wondering what had happened to you, how she had never stopped loving the child she had been forced to give away. I hired investigators to find you. Took almost a year, but eventually they tracked you down. You were living in Washington, working at an investment bank, apparently successful and secure. You had parents who had raised you, a brother you had grown up with, a life that seemed complete without me. I went to see Jennifer before she died. I promised her that I would watch over you, that I would make sure you were provided for, that I would do everything in my power to make up for what we had done. She asked me not to disrupt your life, not to destroy the family you had built, not to burden you with secrets that might do more harm than good. I honored her wishes. I watched you from a distance, following your career, taking pride in your achievements, loving you in the only way I could. I set up the trust that you have now inherited, ensuring that you would have resources even if you never learned where they came from. But I also hoped, selfishly perhaps, that someday you would learn the truth. That someday you would know that you had a father who loved you, even if he was too cowardly to show it. That someday you would understand why I did what I did, even if you could not forgive me for it. You are my son, Silas, my only child, the greatest gift I never had the courage to claim. I am sorry I was not there for you. I am sorry I let fear and ambition rob us both of the relationship we could have had. I am sorry I was not the father you deserved. But I hope that this letter, and the inheritance that comes with it, will be some small compensation for everything I failed to give you. Live well, my son. Be happy, and know that somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, I will be watching over you still. With all my love, Charles Edward Carrington. I set down the letter and wept. I wept for the father I had never known, for the mother who had been forced to give me up, for the 41 years of lies and secrets and lost opportunities. I wept for the family I had thought was mine, the Montgomerys who had bought me and raised me and never quite managed to love me the way parents should love a child. And I wept for myself, for the boy who had always felt like an outsider in his own family, who had spent his entire life trying to earn approval that was never really his to earn. I had two fathers, one who had raised me with cold obligation, and one who had loved me from afar but was too afraid to claim me. Neither of them had given me what I needed, but at least one of them had tried, in his limited way, to make things right. That was more than I had expected. It was more than I had dared to hope for. The months that followed were a time of transformation. I left my job at the investment bank, no longer needing the money and no longer willing to sacrifice my life for a career that had never brought me real happiness. I used some of Charles's inheritance to establish a foundation in Jennifer's name, providing support for young mothers in difficult circumstances, the kind of support that might have allowed her to keep me if it had existed 40 years ago. The Jennifer Caldwell Foundation now operates in 12 states, providing housing assistance, childcare support, job training, and counseling services for young mothers facing impossible choices. We have helped hundreds of women keep their children when they wanted to, and supported those who chose adoption with ethical, transparent processes that protect both mothers and children. Every life we touch is a testament to Jennifer's memory. Every young mother who gets to raise her child because we were there to help is proof that her suffering was not in vain. I think about her constantly, this woman I never knew but whose DNA I carry, whose gray eyes look back at me from the mirror every morning. I also established a scholarship fund in Charles's name, providing educational opportunities for first-generation college students from working-class backgrounds. Charles had been that student once, washing dishes and cleaning offices to pay his way through school. He never forgot where he came from, and neither will I. The foundation work has given me something I never had before, a sense of purpose that goes beyond personal achievement. For decades, I chased success as defined by the Montgomerys, measuring my worth in promotions and bonuses and professional accolades. Now I measure it differently. Now I measure it in mothers who get to watch their children grow up, in students who get chances they never thought they would have, in the slow healing of wounds that have festered for generations. I confronted my adoptive family one final time, not with anger but with something closer to pity. They had bought a child to complete their picture-perfect family, and in doing so, they had created a wound that never healed. They had given me material advantages but emotional poverty, success without connection, achievement without love. Thomas reached out to me several months later. He wanted to apologize, he said, for the way our father had treated me, for the advantages he had enjoyed that I was denied. He wanted to rebuild our relationship on honest terms, as brothers if not by blood then by shared history. I considered it. I am still considering it. The hurt runs deep, and I am not sure it can ever fully heal. But Thomas was a child too, shaped by the same dynamics that shaped me, and perhaps he is not entirely to blame for the role he was cast in. My mother, Eleanor, I have not spoken to since the will reading. She has sent letters, tearful and apologetic, begging for forgiveness and understanding. I have not responded. I am not ready. I may never be ready. Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. Some betrayals cannot be explained away with good intentions or desperate circumstances. Eleanor participated in buying me, in lying to me, in creating the conditions for my lifelong sense of inadequacy. I cannot simply forget that because she is sorry now. Instead, I have focused on building a new life, one defined by my own choices rather than the circumstances of my birth. I have traveled to places I always wanted to see, met people who know nothing about my complicated history, experienced the freedom that comes from having enough money to never worry about money again. And I have searched for any remaining traces of my biological parents, the man who loved me from afar and the woman who never stopped grieving for the child she lost. I found Jennifer's grave in a small cemetery outside Richmond. It was a modest stone, simply inscribed with her name and dates, nothing to indicate the tragedy and love and loss that her life had contained. The grass around it was overgrown when I first visited, the stone weathered and stained, clearly untended for years. I had it cleaned and restored. I hired a landscaping service to maintain the plot, to plant flowers that bloom year-round, to ensure that Jennifer's resting place is always beautiful and cared for. It is the least I can do for the woman who gave me life, who loved me for the brief time she was allowed to hold me, who never stopped grieving for the child she lost. I visit it now whenever I am in Virginia, bringing flowers and sitting beside it, talking to her as if she could hear me. The cemetery caretakers know me by name now. They probably think I am mourning a wife or a mother in the traditional sense. They do not know the complicated truth of our relationship. I tell her that I understand. I tell her that I forgive her. I tell her that I know she loved me, even though circumstances forced her to let me go. I tell her about the foundation in her name, about the young mothers we are helping, about the lives being saved because she suffered. And I tell her about Charles, about the father who spent the last decade of his life trying to make things right. I tell her that he kept his promise, that he watched over me, that he provided for me in the end. I tell her that I wish they had found each other again before it was too late, that they could have built a relationship with me together, that we could have been a family in some strange and unconventional way. But life does not always give us what we wish for. Sometimes it gives us something else, something we did not expect, something that forces us to redefine everything we thought we knew. I was purchased for $5,000 by people who never quite managed to love me. I was watched over by a billionaire father who was too afraid to claim me. I inherited $23 million from a man I never met and nothing but painful truths from the man who raised me. It is not the life I expected. It is not the life anyone would choose. But it is my life, finally and fully. And I am only now, at 41 years old, learning what that means. The check for my inheritance is deposited. The trust is in my name. The foundation in Jennifer's memory is helping young mothers every day. Charles Carrington's legacy lives on in me, the son he never publicly acknowledged but never stopped loving. And I am finally free. Free from the expectations of parents who bought me. Free from the shadow of a brother who was always the real son. Free from the lies that defined my first 4 decades of life. I do not know what comes next. I do not know who I will become now that I finally know who I am. But for the first time in my life, I am excited to find out. I am Silas Montgomery. I am also, by blood, a Carrington. I carry 2 names now, 2 identities, 2 histories that converge in my body and my story. The name Montgomery reminds me of where I came from, of the family that bought me and raised me and never quite managed to love me fully. The name Carrington reminds me of where I am going, of the father who watched over me from afar, of the inheritance that has given me the freedom to become whoever I choose to be. Both names are mine. Both histories have shaped me, and I am only just beginning to understand what that means. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.